Buenos dias, buongiorno, bonjour, konnichiwa, ni hao, dobre outro, guten morgen. Good morning. How is everything? I'm hoping everything is going okay in your world. We are getting very close to actually starting school. This is lecture number 11, and you'll be in class in about 9 days. That'll be it anyway. So nevertheless, let me give you a refresher here on what we went over the last time we were together. We were talking about the American Revolution. Went through a number of campaigns and battles of the American Revolution. That's all fun. It's all fun material to study. If you get a chance to visit any of these Revolutionary War battlefields, I encourage you to do so. All right, so let's pick up our discussion today. Where we left off the other day, we'd ended the war, we had the Treaty of Paris, and what's going to happen to America as a result of this. So let's go back to our camera here so I can get you on outline form here, and we're going to find that 20 to 30% of the population in what is now the United States here, or what is going to soon be the United States, are actually Tories. And if you remember the other day, Tories are loyalists, they're loyal to the king. Well, these people don't fit very well in the American society anymore. So what's going to happen to them? Well, I'm sure that many of them were kind of closet loyalists, and so many were probably undetected. But for the 20 to 30% that were rather open with this, they're uncomfortable where America is located today. So many of them, in fact, as many as 100,000, actually chose to go to England or go into Canada, particularly places such as Nova Scotia, to find some sanctuary there. So anyway, that was something they had to deal with. And another factor that we have, what about slaves? What are we going to do with the slaves here? When Great Britain, when the English army, Great Britain, went through the South, they emancipated many of the slaves. Half of the slaves in Georgia and 1/3 of the slaves in South Carolina were emancipated. So what's going to now happen with this? These slaves were emancipated, and the war's now over, so some of these slaves, are African slaves, are just re-enslaved, so to speak here. For some of the slaves, they made their way up into Canada, or even into England. One individual, Thomas Jeremiah, who was a black man, in 1775 staged a slave revolt. What he was hoping to do was to arm the uprising slaves with British weapons there. His plans were discovered, and Thomas Jeremiah was executed. All right, I'm going to come back to that slave issue in just a little bit. All right, now how about women? How do women fare in the American society? With many men gone to war, then this meant that women had to take care of the households and just assume the roles of men. For many women, they were camp followers, and these camp followers who would follow the armies into battle here. These were females, and often they followed George Washington's army. Washington was not very happy with this, but at the winter at Valley Forge, George Washington had his wife, Martha Washington, present with him. So it's hard to say much about this. And I asked my class here, what do you think the effect is on women following the armies here? And of course, these women would provide creature comforts. They would darn the socks, wash the clothes, cook the meals, if you will, provide other comforts, if you know what I'm talking about. What do you think happened to the sexually transmitted disease raiding George Washington's Continental Army? And the answer to that is rather obvious. You know what happened with that. All right, so let's go back to my camera here and let's see some of the other noteworthy women of the time there. Molly Pitcher. And I'm not even sure there was a real Molly Pitcher. Some historians will tell you that if there was, her name was Mary Hayes Macaulay. And the way the story goes with Molly Pitcher is that she followed her husband onto the battlefield, and she would bring pitchers or buckets of refreshing water to these thirsty troops here. Molly Pitcher. And the way the story continues, in the Battle of Monmouth, when her husband was wounded or perhaps even killed, she took his place as a part of an artillery crew and placed in hand here a sponge staff and took his place there in firing the artillery piece. Many cities lay claim to Molly Pitcher. I took this photograph in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It's in a cemetery there. It shows you a statue of Molly Pitcher carrying a sponge staff, and that is what you use, like I said, to swab out a barrel of a artillery piece after it has been fired with that. All right, so Molly Pitcher. All right, we had another lady here associated with this period of time. It was Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams was the wife of John Adams. And they were quite in love with each other, even though for most of the time they didn't live with each other. She lived in Quincy, Pennsylvania, and he worked in Boston. It's only a short distance away, about 10 miles, I'm guessing anyway. And if you're going there, you can take the metro system and you can go from one place to the other with that. But anyway, on the weekends, John Adams, second president of the United States later anyway, would actually visit with Abigail Adams. And she was a very forceful woman, and she very outspoken. And she would write letters to John Adams. He would write letters back to her. Many of those letters are preserved today. And which she was encouraging these leaders in the fledgling government here to extend or expand the rights of women. All right, so let's take a look at the rights of women here. And if you were a married woman, I'll tell you what let's do. Let's look at an unmarried woman first. If you were an unmarried woman, you had some legal rights. You could own property. You could actually enter into contracts. But once you got married, then things changed. So let's take a look at some of the rights or the lack of rights that a married woman has. If you have no legal rights. If you were unmarried, you had legal rights. You could enter into contracts, but if you're married, you cannot. You cannot own the property. And as you well know, I would ask you in class, if you are a woman and you own property and you marry, who owns the property? And it's obvious it's going to be your husband. You had no independent income. If you earned independent income, it became the part of your husband's income, unless he was kind enough to allow you to keep it there. The husband owns all possessions here. You could make no legal transactions. And in a few communities, females could actually vote, but by and large, you could not vote. You probably could not vote at the state level anyway. And if you were a female, you did not have the right to file for a divorce. Your husband can file for a divorce, but you cannot file for a divorce here. All right, so following the war, American trade and economy boomed. America developed new commerce. This was commerce that went to the Caribbean, commerce that went to South America. They were able to cross Cape Horn, go up the western coastline of North America, trade with California, trade with Hawaii, and even across the ocean here. And Americans began to develop a distinct pattern, and never again would we be dependent upon another country here. It also became quite fashionable to wear American homespun. This is clothing that you actually would make at home. Get away from that pretentious reds and blues of the British, All right, so anyway, let's go back to our document camera and we'll pick up some more information here. Now, one of the things that we're going to have to consider here in this fight for independence, if we did really want independence, was what type of government would be present. You'll see this on your video, and I hope you watch these videos. I put these out there for a purpose for you folks. But it's one thing to fight a war, but it's an entirely different thing, concurrent with this, to create a brand new form of government, particularly a form of government that we're not familiar with. I mean, there was no government like we have in present day, 2020 anyway. But one of the things that they wanted power. Power to be coming directly, power based upon popular will, with power coming directly from the people itself. All right, so anyway, and that's kind of something that we really have to deal with this. Now, one of the principal themes here in the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. I firmly believe that. It's one of my tenets that I address and I hold fast to, that all men are created equal here. We're all born the same. Some people do not take the advantage of it as other people take the advantage of it. Some people get their education like you good folks are, and I hope you do well, and you probably will with that. Some people do not choose to get an education, and of course this holds them back with that. But the basic theme here of our Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. Now, we addressed the topic here of slavery just a little bit ago. How are we going to deal with this? And we have to, we're going to address this on several different occasions here in different lectures. George Washington was a slave owner. George Washington owned about 300 to 400 slaves. Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner. These were great Americans here, and that's just part of our legacy and part of what we have to live with as historians here. So how do we deal with slavery? In the northern states, in Pennsylvania, in 1780, in Pennsylvania, they abolished slavery. 3 years later, in Massachusetts, they abolished slavery. In Maryland adopted a policy of manumission or voluntary freeing of the slaves, and 20% of the slaves in Maryland were voluntarily freed. We had 20,000 slaves in Virginia that were just voluntarily freed here. The only states in the United States at that time, if you want to call it the United States, the only states that were still allowing slaves to be brought into the states was that of Georgia and South Carolina. All right, so anyway, we'll go back to our camera here, and let's move right along here. Now, several things are going to take place here that'll be quite different than what we've had before with this. We're going to see a number of land ordinances that are going to be established by this Continental Congress, if you will. One of these was known as the Land Ordinance of 1785, and it established a series of townships according to range lines and section lines here on land that was present north of the Ohio River. So I tell you what, let me show you what I'm talking about here. And let's look on page, let me find it for you, 154 in your textbook. And if you look on that page, you can see what I'm talking about. North of the Ohio River, this is the Ohio River that runs through here, and north of the Ohio River, and establish a system of surveying and selling land. All right, now if you look at this, this is sometimes referred to as a grid system. If we look at here, this is a section right here, or I should say it is a township made up of 36 sections. These sections are numbered. I'm having to read this upside down. Our numbering system today is a little bit different than what we have there, but it's numbered from 1 through 36. Now each one of these sections is 1 mile by 1 mile, so that's 1 square mile. So that means we have 6 miles here, 6 miles here, or it is 36 square miles here. And all of these are numbered here. You'll find that sections number 8 and 11 and 26 and 29 were reserved for the federal government. Section number 16 was always reserved for a public school. And we don't see this in the South, but you do see it in the North. And in the North, where they have roads that run north, south, east, and west, unlike what we have in Walker County, where they're running every different direction there. But you can mark it on your clock odometer that if you're driving across flat Ohio, in 6 miles you'll see a school, and in 6 additional miles you'll see a school. It's a public school. It's just the way that the system was laid out with that. All right, now that was known as the Land Ordinance of 1785, which established a system of townships. All right, I want to share something else with you folks here, and some of you may be familiar with this. This is known as a topographic map. It is a topographic map of Walker County, and in fact, it's on the Sipsey Fork here. Let's see here. I might have something else. I'm sorry to move that away from you like I did there. And I thought this was a sunlight district. It actually is a sunlight district here. And some of you, if you look close enough, might recognize some of the places here. But if you look carefully here, you can see that these are sections here. This one is number 27. This one is number 28, such as this here. And it actually allows you to survey this land and to be able to identify a particular plot of territory if you have a deed and a property description of it too. And this is kind of fun to work with here. I enjoy it very, very much. And some of you may be familiar with that, particularly if you've worked in surveying before. All right, let's see what else is going to happen here. We likewise will have the Congress to establish the Northwest Ordinance. And under the Northwest Ordinance, this created the Northwest Territory. There was also a provision added to this that any time a territory or a plot of territory achieved a population of 60,000, you could apply for statehood. Right now we have 13 states. We're talking about here in 1786 and 1787. You had 13 states. You know that we're going to add additional states. But one of the provisions of this was you had to have a population of 60,000. All right, now this creates a Northwest Territory. I'm going to go back to me, and let's see if I can get the lightning of the camera here. And I want you to look off my shoulder here. And let's look at this territory here. Now here's the Ohio River. The Ohio River, which is running down through here just like this all the way across here until it connects to the Mississippi River. Now where the Northwest Territory is located, it is this area which is right here. Now a lot of people think that the Northwest Territory would be over in states of Washington and Oregon, and that's just not the case here. The United States doesn't even own that part of North America at this time. The United States, our property, it stops over at the Mississippi River. So anyway, when we look at the Northwest Territory, this is the area here, which is Ohio. And I want you to recognize that the Northwest Territory is Ohio, and it would also include what is present day the eastern parts of Michigan. Okay, so anyway, that's that. Now, if we stop and consider this, and I don't want to take my camera away from that right now, even though we say that this is part of the United States, I would ask you in class, who do you think are the principal inhabitants of that area? And of course, that would be Native Americans. We have many, many Native American tribes there. If you travel to Ohio today and delve into the history there, you'll find all sorts of references to the Native Americans. All right, so let's go back to our camera here. And some of the Indian populations that were present there in Ohio, the Miamis, the Shawnees, the Ottawa, the Delaware, the Chippewa. And for the United States, we're actually going to make an attempt to try to sign treaties with these Native American populations. And in some cases here, we were actually successful here to some degree with the Iroquois, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and some of those groups. But that group that I showed you a few minutes ago with the Miami and the Shawnee and the Delaware and the Ottawa and the Chippewa, they refused to negotiate. They refused to give up their land. All right, so let's go back to my documents camera, and I want to introduce you to a person by the name of General Arthur St. Clair. Not one of my favorite individuals. In fact, during the Revolutionary War, he'd been defeated on several occasions here. But he was appointed as governor of the Northwest Territory. Think in your mind now, Northwest Territory, this is the area where Ohio is today. And it was his desire to remove the Native Americans, from that area. And he was not having much success with this. Now, one of the Indian leaders here was a leader of the Miami Indians. If you're following on page 155 in your textbook, you can see a likeness of him. And I'll show you a likeness of him right here. And I would tell you in class, please do not laugh at that name here of Little Turtle. He was a magnificent leader here. This photograph was taken, or this portrait was taken after 1794. And in fact, George Washington is president, and supposedly that is a medallion around the neck there of Little Turtle, which resembles George Washington. I don't know about that for sure, but anyway. Little Turtle and Blue Jacket, who was one of the chiefs of the Shawnees, refused to give up their land. And so what Arthur St. Clair did, and I think I'll go back to my map here so you can kind of appreciate this. And I know we're not very close to this, but what Arthur St. Clair did, he had 1,200 men with him, 1,200, shall we say, inexperienced soldiers, and they left out of the area of Cincinnati. Cincinnati is located right through here, and they moved up the river here, the Miami River, and it took them, this was in October and November, so the temperatures are getting a little bit cold, and it took them several weeks to do so. They're marching on foot, and so they're quite fatigued, quite tired, and they got up into this region here. So right along, it's not marked on the map here, but right in this region right there. And they actually walked into a trap there. There was 1,200 of them. And I'll go back to my camera here so you can kind of get the numbers on this anyway. And what we refer to that as is St. Clair's defeat. And I want you to recognize that St. Clair's defeat took place on November the 4th of 1791. I don't hold you responsible for dates with this. But out of the 1,200 soldiers, we had 1,200 soldiers that were under Arthur St. Clair, and he did survive this. But 637 were killed. We had another 300 wounded, and it was just a massacre by Little Turtles, Miami, and the Shawnee Indians under Blue Jacket here. I want to share an article with you, and this came out of an Ohio newspaper years ago, as a matter of fact. In fact, I collected that. Let me read the date, 1991. So it's been a long time when this came in my possession. But the article addresses, St. Clair's defeat. One of the Army's worst defeats came in Ohio. Indians killed 637. They called it Fort Recovery. And anyway, you can see a reconstructed fort there today. But this was the worst defeat the Army at the hands of the Native Americans in the history of our country. And I would imagine, a few minutes ago, if I had asked you what was the worst defeat at the hands of the Native Americans of the United States Army, you probably would have told me Custer's Last Stand. And that's just not the case. Custer's Last Stand, we had about 230 or so U.S. soldiers that were killed with that. All right, so anyway, we know how revenge takes place here. And for the United States, they have been crossed now. So nonetheless here, folks, in 1794, Joe Anthony Wayne, they referred to him as Mad Anthony Wayne, defeated Little Turtle. Anthony Wayne greatly outnumbered the Indian numbers, and Anthony Wayne had an army force of about 4,000, 5,000. But they clashed with Little Turtle at the Battle of Fallen Timbers and defeated Little Turtle. Little Turtle was not killed there, and in fact they ended up signing a treaty giving away their lands here. Let's see if I have this on the map. I think I do have it on the map here, showing you where the Battle of Fallen Timbers is located. It's about where the city in Ohio is of Toledo. All right, so anyway, and that was that. Okay, so let's go back here and see what else is going to take place here. I like Little Turtle. I think you need to remember him. All right, now, for some Americans, they were unhappy with things that were taking place, particularly in Massachusetts. And one of the individuals was known as Daniel Shays. Daniel Shays had been a Continental Army captain, and he formed a group of just thugs. They were rogues, if you will. They gave themselves the name of Shaysites. Now, where this takes place, this is in Massachusetts, and what they wanted, they were demanding several things. If we were in class, I would write these out for you, but I'm not going to hold you responsible for it. They demanded paper money. The reason they wanted paper money, paper money is a lot easier to put your hands on than that of gold and silver. They wanted tax relief because many of these states, particularly Massachusetts, was trying to eliminate its war debts from the Revolutionary War, so they were placing taxes on people. The Shaysites also wanted a moratorium on indebtedness, the abolition of imprisonment for indebtedness, and that was what was taking place at that time. Is that if you owed money, with all these high taxes, and you owed money, then if you couldn't pay your taxes, you just went to jail here too. And they also wanted a relocation of the capital from Boston, which is over on the eastern parts of Massachusetts, and let's move it over to the central part of Massachusetts, such as a place as Springfield. So what these Shaysites wanted to do, and like I said, they were just really a group of just rogues here, and it was like a gang, and they wanted to arm themselves better. And what better place can you arm yourself if you're in Massachusetts than the site of the first federal arsenal, or armory, which is present there at Springfield, Massachusetts. And so that's what their plan was. They were going to march their army, the Shaysites march their army on Springfield, Massachusetts, break into the armory there, steal the weapons, arm themselves, and just create a wholesale nuisance with it. But unfortunately for them, the governor of Massachusetts found out about what Shay was going to do, and he ordered the Massachusetts militia into Springfield, where the Massachusetts militia and the Shaysites all clashed with each other. I guess it was a good thing for the Massachusetts militia. They had cannons, and when they opened artillery fire on the Shaysites, it just dispersed the group. Daniel Shays and the principal leaders of the Shaysites were all captured. They were tried for treason against the United States government and scheduled for execution. Fortunately for them, they were later pardoned. All right, so anyway, that was that. All right, so we're going to move into a different chapter in your textbook here, folks. I would have to thumb through the pages, and it looks like it's going to be chapter 6. We have to create a constitution, and so if you want to flip over a couple more pages in your textbook, you can do so. I recommend that you go over to the page there that shows you Mount Vernon. All right, so I'm going to go back to my camera here, and let's move right along with this. All right, so that was Shays' Rebellion. I'll give you a chance to copy that down. It took place in January of 1789. All right, so we need to move on here, folks. We're on our way to creating a constitution. I don't know if I can get the constitution established today, but we'll make our way into that subject. Now, I want to tell you that for many Americans, they were disappointed in this Continental Congress, disappointed in this Confederation Congress. The Confederation congressmen would avoid going to meetings. One of the major reasons for this is that there was so much back pay that was owed to the Revolutionary War soldiers that these soldiers would go to the Congress meetings, demanded their back pay. And so what these congressmen decided to do, they would relocate. So in a matter of 2 years, they changed their location, and they went from Philadelphia and went to Princeton, and then went to Annapolis, and then went to, I think it was New York, and then back to Philadelphia, all in the course of 2 years. It doesn't sound to me like a very, very stable government here. here. And some of the things that people were concerned about, we had 13 states, and each one of these states had a different tariff policy. Do we really need 13 different tariff policies? Do we really need 13 different trade policies here? Or do we need just one tariff policy and one state, one trade policy for the entire 13 states? And I think you would agree with me that we need just one. Many of these states were issuing their own currency. Why don't we just have one currency for the United States here? We wanted protection against the Indians. We wanted protection against rogue groups such as that of Shays and Shays Rebellion there. And so anyway, there was just not a lot of credibility here. So I want to go back to my camera here and let you read a couple of names. And one of the principal problems here before we read those names was in this Congress that we had under the Articles of Confederation, they did not have the power to tax. Now, I'm going to tell you folks, personally, I do not like taxes. I don't like taxes at all. They bother me, but I do realize, for us to have an effective government, we are going to have to pay some taxes here. Where I draw the line is we pay too much taxes for unnecessary projects for that. All right, but two individuals, a man by the name of Alexander Hamilton, you're going to get very familiar with him. James Madison, you're going to get very familiar with him. Likewise here, Hamilton from New York, Madison is from Virginia. They call for a convention, and this convention to take place in Annapolis, Maryland. So let me square this up a little bit here and call for this convention to take place in Annapolis, Maryland to discuss, do we need to develop a new constitution that's better than that or the Articles of Confederation? And to show you how things are falling apart so quickly here, only 5 states sent representatives to Annapolis. At a later time, not today, at a later time, I'll show you a photograph of the old State House in Annapolis, and that's where these representatives met, a few of them as possible, a few of them as there was. And nonetheless, what they're going to decide is that they will, the following spring, they will conduct a constitutional convention and have this to take place in Philadelphia. But one thing that they knew, they had to have the services and the presence of a dynamic leader, a guy that had led this country into its independence and led our country to victory over Great Britain. And I hope you folks realize who I'm talking about, and that is George Washington. George Washington was at Mount Vernon and comfortably settled into semi-retirement. And when he was prevailed upon to attend this Continental Congress here, to his constitutional convention, George Washington reluctantly agreed. All right, so George Washington went to Philadelphia, and he'll be a part of these founding fathers. There were 55 men. I wish you would recognize this, 55 men that were present there. There were no women. The meetings were closed to the press. They were closed to the population here. All members were sworn to secrecy. You could not divulge the contents of the meeting. And we'll find that 12 states were actually represented with this. Rhode Island was not. Georgia was, but Rhode Island was not. And there are reasons for that, but we need to press on in the lecture without me wasting time telling you about that. But these founding fathers are going to meet from May through September in 1787. Now, the place in which they're going to meet, and I want you to recognize this, they're going to meet in the Philadelphia State House. This is referred to as Independence Hall. It is not Carpenter's Hall. This was the same place that the Second Continental Congress met there. All right, George Washington was selected as executive. That is not president. And I want you to look at the little video clip that I have included for you. It's pretty good. It's only about 11 minutes, and explains this very, very well. All right, so I'm going to go back to the camera on me, and I'm going to try to show you a couple of things here, and we'll try to do it this way if I can get this positioned right. All right, I have it in front of me so I can't see it very well, so I'm going to move it like this. Now, the building that you're seeing in the center, this building right here, is Independence Hall. It's Independence Hall. It has the wings on it. You can still go into the very, very room in which the 55 founding fathers, were present. Now, the building that is over on this side, where am I here? The building that is on this side, this is Carpenter's Hall. Carpenter's Hall is down the block a little bit. I'm going to flip my map around here. This is difficult for me to reach around and see what I'm actually doing. I'm having to look at the screen here. But if you look at this, this is where Carpenter's Hall is. This is a historic section of Philadelphia, where Independence Hall is right here. So they're only a couple of blocks away from each other. It's been a few years since I've been in Philadelphia. When I was last there, the Liberty Bell was here. That's my understanding. It has been moved today anyway. If you go up to the cemetery here, this is where you'll find the burial site of Benjamin Franklin. What happens here, he has like a concrete slab that covers over the grave, and people throw coins on it. I don't know why they do so. Over here is the home of Betsy Ross. You know, Betsy Ross that developed the flag for our country here. And there are various other locations here that at this point in our course you're not familiar with. All right, now, one of the things that you will see here when you go inside the State House, as let's see if I can find it over here, is a chair. Now, this is the upper portion of the chair, and if you look very, very closely right here, you'll see that there is a sun. And when George Washington was seated in this chair, his head was right here. His head went right up to where the sun was. And so when you first look at it, you think, well, this is a setting sun. But Benjamin Franklin, observing George Washington, said, no, it is not a setting sun. It is a rising sun. We are creating a new country. We're creating a new country with these founding fathers here. All right, so we'll get that to the side here. And let's go back to our camera here. All right, and one individual, Edmund Randolph of Virginia, proposed a type of government that was completely new to everyone. This was a government made up of a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judiciary branch. We hadn't seen anything like this before. I guess in some respects you could say the old Roman government was kind of like this with its senators and its consuls and its magistrates, but this is a brand new system here. And in James Madison developed what was called the Virginia Plan. Now, I want you to remember this. You need to be able to associate these names here. Edmund Randolph from Virginia, James Madison with the Virginia Plan. And under the Virginia Plan, there would be two houses. Now, most of you are very familiar with this. But with these two houses, we would have a lower house and an upper house. Now, members of the lower house would be chosen based upon a percentage or a proportion of the population of that state. So what that meant, if we have highly populated states like Virginia, it would have 10 times more representatives than, say, a small state such as Delaware. But all of the states would have representation based upon the population from that state. And then he also proposed an upper house. Now, this upper house, the members would be chosen by the lower house. Now, immediately there was a problem with this because those states that had small populations would not be represented in the upper house here. So anyway, like I said, some of the smaller populated states here had immediate problems with this. So it's back to the drawing board. What are we going to do here about choosing members of the upper house? Today we recognize the upper house as the Senate. We recognize the lower house as the House of Representatives. All right, so anyway, that was a dilemma here. Now, one man by the name of William Patterson from New Jersey, offered a different proposal. This was known as the New Jersey Plan. And under this proposal, let's just keep the Articles of Confederation, and have one Congress, and under the Articles of Confederation, allow this Congress now to have the power to tax and also have the power to regulate trade. And that was tabled. It never did take place with that. All right, now, one of the problems we were going to have with all of this was, how are we going to factor in slaves? How would slaves factor into this? At that time, in 1787, are slaves population or are slaves property? It's a big, big factor here, particularly if we balance here, in the North where we have small numbers of slaves. In some states, they don't have it whatsoever. And in the South, which we have large populations of slaves here. So it was a big deal. How do slaves factor into the population with that, And so anyway, Benjamin Franklin was chairing a committee, and this committee, which was called the Grand Committee. Every state had a representative that was present there at the Constitutional Convention here, had a voice with this. And they finally came out came up with a great compromise. Now, I don't want you to question me about this, and I won't let you question me about this, even if we're face-to-face in class, because I don't know how that this Constitutional Grand Committee came up with what they came up with. But it's in the Constitution. Next time we get together, we'll read through the Constitution here. But what they factored in, what they came up with, was slave population counts as 3/5 of a person. That a slave counts actually as 3/5 of a person. So this means that in a southern state, if you have 10,000 slaves, then it only counts 6,000 individuals for population purposes there from the slave population. Don't ask me why it was not 4/5 or 2/5 or 1/5. I have no earthly idea. All right, I'm going to start closing down here, folks. But I want you to recognize that James Madison is the father of the United States Constitution. The father of the United States Constitution. I need you to recognize this. I think that's a pretty good stopping point for today here. We've covered a lot of things. I'm still not through the Constitution. Depending on the amount of time we'll have to devote to the next lecture, I'll decide how much time we're going to spend with the Constitution actually going through that. It's an interesting document. I hope you actually read that. All right. Take care, and I'll see you the next time we have class. All right. Thank you.